soon as breaking Arsenal transfer news, Quansah talks, Osimhen twist and the latest Gunners update part Arsenal are still active in the transfer market. Arsenal may already be Premier League champions, but Mikel Arteta and the club are clearly not treating the summer transfer window as finished. With the new season approaching, Arsenal are continuing to monitor opportunities in several positions. The Gunners have already strengthened their squad with major additions, including Bruno Guimaraes, but the latest reports suggest that further business could still happen before the transfer window closes. This is particularly important because Arsenal are dealing with defensive injury concerns, while there are also questions surrounding the future of several attacking players. The latest developments have placed Jarell, Quansah, Victor Osimhen and Brighton midfielder Jack Hinshelwood among the names attracting significant attention. But Arsenal fans should be careful with one thing. Not every transfer story means a deal is close to being completed. Some negotiations are still at an early stage, while others depend on player departures, transfer fees, and whether selling clubs are willing to negotiate. That distinction is extremely important in this summer's Arsenal transfer story. Jarell Quansah talks become one of the biggest stories. One of the strongest current Arsenal transfer stories concerns Jarell Quansah. According to reports, Arsenal have opened negotiations with Bayer Leverkusen over a possible move for the England international defender. The interest makes sense from Arsenal's perspective. William Saliba and Jurrien Timber have both had injury concerns, and Arsenal need enough defensive depth if they want to compete seriously across the Premier League and Champions League. Quansah is also attractive because of his versatility and his experience in English football. Reports indicate that Bayer Leverkusen value the player at around €50 million, approximately £43 million, while Arsenal's interest is being explored through negotiations rather than an already completed agreement. That means Arsenal fans should not describe Quansah as an Arsenal player yet. The important development is that discussions have reportedly begun, and if those negotiations progress, Quansah could become one of the most important defensive additions of Arsenal's summer. Part why Arsenal need another defender. The Quansah story becomes even more interesting when we look at Arsenal's current defensive situation. Mikel Arteta has built one of the strongest defensive structures in English football, but injuries can quickly change the situation. Reuters reports that Jurrien Timber is still recovering and needs more time before returning to full training, while William Saliba remains sidelined with a back injury. That creates an obvious question. Does Arsenal have enough defensive depth to compete for the Premier League title again while also fighting in Europe? This is where a player such as Quansah could become valuable. Arsenal would not necessarily need him only as a replacement for one specific player. His versatility could give Arteta another option in different defensive situations. The timing is also significant. Arsenal are about to begin another demanding season, and the club cannot afford to enter a long campaign with too few reliable defenders. Therefore, even if the Quansah negotiations are not yet a done deal, the logic behind Arsenal's interest is clear. Part Victor Osimhen. A major Arsenal transfer twist. Now we come to one of the biggest attacking stories. Victor Osimhen has once again been linked with Arsenal. Recent reports indicate that Arsenal's interest in the Galatasaray striker has resurfaced during discussions between the clubs. The interesting part is that these conversations have reportedly involved possible outgoing Arsenal players, including Ethan Nwaneri and Gabriel Martinelli. This does not mean Arsenal have agreed a swap deal for Osimhen. It means the striker's availability has reportedly been discussed. That is a very different situation. Osimhen remains one of the most talked about strikers in the European transfer market, and Arsenal's interest would immediately create enormous excitement among supporters. However, the financial side of the deal would be extremely important. Arsenal would have to consider the transfer fee, wages and the overall structure of any potential agreement. So for now, the correct description is that Osimhen is being discussed and linked with Arsenal, not that Arsenal have signed him. Could Osimhen really join Arsenal? The biggest question is whether an Osimhen transfer actually makes sense for Arsenal. From a football perspective, there is no doubt that Osimhen would bring a different profile to the attack. His pace, physical strength, movement and finishing ability could give Arteta another attacking option. But Arsenal already have established forwards, so the club would need to decide whether investing heavily in another striker is the best use of the transfer budget. That is why the possible involvement of Martinelli and Nwaneri is particularly interesting. If Arsenal decide to allow an attacking player to leave, the club could potentially create more space in the squad and financially support another major signing. However, there is currently no confirmed agreement saying that Martinelli or Nwaneri will be exchanged for Osimhen. In fact, reports today indicate that Martinelli has rejected interest from Galatasaray and wants to remain at Arsenal. That development makes the situation even more complicated. Therefore, Arsenal fans should watch this story carefully, but they should not treat an Osimhen transfer as completed. Park Gabriel Martinelli sends an important message. Gabriel Martinelli's situation could have a major influence on Arsenal's transfer plans. Reports say that Galatasaray made an offer of around £38 million for the Brazilian winger, but Martinelli rejected the possibility of moving to Turkey. This is important because Arsenal are reportedly open to considering his departure if they can secure a suitable replacement, but the player himself does not appear to be pushing for the move. That means Arsenal cannot simply decide to sell him and assume the transfer will happen. The situation depends on three sides: Arsenal, the interested club, and the player. For Arsenal, Martinelli remains an important squad member. At the same time, the arrival of new attacking options has created competition for places. This could become one of the biggest stories of the final weeks of the transfer window. If Martinelli stays, Arsenal retain a dangerous winger with Premier League and Champions League experience. If he leaves, Arsenal could have to bring in another attacker. Jack Hinshelwood emerges as another Arsenal target. Another name now attracting attention is Brighton midfielder Jack Hinshelwood. ESPN reports that Arsenal are leading the race for the versatile Brighton player. This is a different type of transfer story compared with Osimhen. Hinshelwood is younger and offers versatility, meaning Arteta could potentially use him in different positions depending on the tactical situation. Reports suggest a potential valuation of around £51 million, although that does not mean Arsenal have agreed to pay that amount. Manchester United may also be interested, according to reports, so Arsenal could face competition. This is exactly why the final weeks of the transfer window could become very interesting. Arsenal have already strengthened their midfield with Bruno Guimaraes, but Arteta may still want additional versatility and depth. The club's strategy appears to be about building a squad capable of handling a long season, rather than simply adding famous names. What could happen before the window closes? The remaining weeks could be extremely important for Arsenal. The club appear to have several possibilities. First, Arsenal could complete a defensive signing, with Quansah one of the most strongly reported options. Second, they could continue exploring attacking opportunities, including the reported interest in Osimhen. Third, Arsenal could look at midfield depth, with Hinshelwood now being linked. And finally, player departures could influence everything. Martinelli's decision to remain at the club could reduce the need for Arsenal to find another winger immediately. Meanwhile, interest in Nwaneri could also create another situation for the club to manage. The important thing is that none of these possibilities should automatically be described as completed transfers. Arsenal have time to make decisions, and the transfer window remains open until September 1st. Therefore, the coming weeks could still bring major changes.